The official term for it was a heat dome. I call it Hell's Front Porch. It was the kind of soul-crushing, triple-digit heat that makes you question the life choices that led you to a place without an ocean breeze. The sun didn't just shine, it bullied you. It baked the asphalt in our tidy suburban paradise of whispering willows until it was the consistency of warm Laffy Taffy. I saw a squirrel yesterday just give up. It was lying spread-eagled on a branch, looking like a tiny furry rug that had been thrown out an upstairs window. I knew exactly how it felt. My name is Alex, and my life's ambition is to maintain a perfect 72-degree equilibrium. I'm a mid-level cog in the great grinding machine of the city's Department of Public Works. My job title is something long and boring: Urban Infrastructure Logistics Coordinator, or something equally designed to induce sleep. In practice, it means I know where all the water mains are, and I have keys to things most people don't even know are locked. It's a superpower I use mostly to find clean, quiet bathrooms and to inspect municipal air conditioning systems. And the mother of all air conditioning systems was housed in the Whispering Willows Community Center. It was a squat, uninspired brick building from the 70s, but inside it was Antarctica. It hummed with the glorious, life-giving power of industrial-grade HVAC, a sound more beautiful to me than any symphony. With the heat wave entering its second week and residential AC units popping like champagne corks at a wedding, the community center had become the unofficial town square. It was a refugee camp for the overheated. My next-door neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a woman whose age was somewhere between 80 and immortal, practically lived there. Her little window unit had started making a sound like a badger in a blender before finally dying, and the community center was the only thing keeping her from being slow-cooked in her own living room. You'd find her there every day, sitting in a plastic chair, knitting something incomprehensible, and telling stories about the Great Depression to any kid who would listen. It was for people like her that the center was critical. It was a public good. Unfortunately, in Whispering Willows, all public goods had to go through a private gatekeeper. Brenda. Brenda was our Homeowners Association president, a title she wore with the grim authority of a warden at a maximum security prison. She was a woman who probably ironed her socks and measured her lawn with a micrometer. Her natural predator was joy. My first and only significant run-in with her had occurred last spring. I'd placed a small, tastefully painted garden gnome next to my azaleas. 2 days later, a laminated letter appeared on my door informing me that my lawn ornamentation, Class C, mythical/folklore, was in violation of Bylaw 17, subsection 4, regarding aesthetic cohesion. The gnome, she wrote, was an unapproved shade of red. I was instructed to remove it or face a daily fine. The gnome now lives in my bathroom, staring at me while I brush my teeth. It's a daily reminder that chaos is only ever one Brenda away. So, as I sat in my apartment, feeling the sweat bead on my forehead because my own AC was struggling, I knew where I had to go. I needed the Arctic blast. I needed the hum of the compressors. I grabbed my work bag, the familiar weight of my keyring a comforting jingle at my side, and told myself I was just going to perform a routine, structural integrity assessment. It's amazing what you can justify when you're slowly melting. I stepped outside, and the wall of heat hit me. The air was thick, shimmery, and smelled faintly of hot garbage and regret. Across the street I could see Brenda on her porch, laser measuring the distance between her neighbor's hedges. She was wearing a massive sun visor and a look of intense concentration, as if she were deciphering enemy code, and not just ensuring the privet was regulation height. I ducked my head and walked faster. I had a bad feeling. When Brenda was this active, it usually meant a new decree was imminent, and in this heat, a decree from her could be a death sentence. The bad feeling in my gut solidified into a sweaty, miserable certainty as I rounded the corner to the community center. There, huddled under the pathetic shade of a single ornamental maple tree, was a crowd. Not a big one, maybe 15 or 20 people, but their collective misery was a palpable force. I saw Mrs. Gable dabbing her forehead with a lace handkerchief. I saw the young mom from down the street, Jennifer, desperately fanning her red-faced baby. I saw a couple of teenagers who were probably just trying to poach the free Wi-Fi, but now looked like they were on the verge of heat stroke. And the big glass doors of the community center were shut, locked tight. My eyes immediately found the piece of paper taped to the door. It was laminated, of course. Lamination was Brenda's signature move. It took a temporary notice and gave it the smug permanence of a tombstone. I pushed my way through the small, grumbling crowd to read it. Official notice from the Whispering Willows Homeowners Association. Due to an increase in unauthorized usage, the community center is hereby closed until further notice. This measure is necessary to address significant liability concerns arising from unpermitted public gatherings and to ensure the facility is available for its primary purpose: pre-scheduled, HOA-sanctioned events. We appreciate your cooperation in maintaining our community standards. Sincerely, Brenda McGillicuddy, President, WWW HOA. I read it twice. My brain, already sluggish from the heat, struggled to process the sheer audacity. Unauthorized usage? It was a public cooling center during a public health emergency? Liability concerns? The only liability was Brenda letting Mrs. Gable keel over on the sun-bleached concrete. This wasn't about rules or safety. This was a power trip, pure and simple. "She can't do this, can she?" Jennifer asked, her voice strained. Her baby let out a pitiful whimper. "Brenda can do anything she prints on a laminating sheet," grumbled a man I recognized as Mr. Henderson from Elm Street. Then I saw her. Across the manicured lawn, standing on her own perfectly edged porch like a queen surveying her unhappy subjects, was Brenda. She had a tall glass of iced tea in one hand and a cordless phone in the other, probably reporting someone's unapproved flower pots to the HOA Enforcement Committee, which was also just her. She saw me looking and gave me a tight, triumphant little smile. That smile did it. It flipped a switch somewhere deep inside my heat-addled brain. The part of me that just wanted to go home and lie down on my tile floor was suddenly overruled by a different, more primal urge. The urge to wipe that smug look right off her face. I looked at Mrs. Gable, who was starting to look pale. I looked at Jennifer's baby, whose face was the color of a ripe tomato. My internal debate was a short one. Option A: trudge home, fill the bathtub with cool water, and post angry comments on the neighborhood Facebook group. Option B: unleash the awesome bureaucratic power of the Department of Public Works. It wasn't even a choice. I turned back to the door, setting my jaw. The crowd quieted down, watching me. I could feel Brenda's glare from across the street. This was it. High noon in Whispering Willows. "Alex, what are you doing?" Mr. Henderson asked. "My job," I said, unzipping my work bag. As if summoned, Brenda scurried across the lawn, her flip-flops making angry slapping sounds on the grass. She moved with the unnatural speed of a hornet whose nest has just been poked. "Step away from the door, Alex," she commanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This is an official HOA directive. The facility is closed." "Brenda, it's 108 degrees out here," I said, my voice level. I was enjoying this far more than I should have. "You've got senior citizens and a baby about to turn into beef jerky. This isn't just a community center. It's a city-owned building designated as a public shelter in a heat advisory." I was making some of that up, but it sounded official as hell. "It is managed by the HOA," she hissed, jabbing a finger at her laminated notice. Our insurance policy is very clear about unsanctioned gatherings. It's a massive liability." "You know what's a massive liability?" I retorted, my hand closing around the cool, heavy metal of my keyring inside my bag. "Negligent homicide. Look it up." Her eyes widened, but before she could formulate a response, I pulled them out. The keys. They weren't shiny or special, just a big, fat ring of about 50 different keys for utility boxes, park gates, maintenance closets, and, yes, municipal buildings. They were the keys to the kingdom, and Brenda was just the self-appointed lady-in-waiting. I dramatically sifted through them, making a show of it, the jangling sound a declaration of war. "Ah, here we are." I selected a long, brass-colored key with MP Master stamped on it. I held it up for her to see, the sun glinting off it like a tiny sword. "Public Works Master Key. It trumps HOA laminated nonsense every day of the week." Brenda's face went through a fascinating series of colors, from pale white to blotchy red to a deep, alarming shade of purple. "You wouldn't dare—" "Watch me," I said. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I pulled the key out, grabbed the handle, and pulled the heavy glass door open. A wave of impossibly cold, blessedly dry air washed over us. It was like opening a refrigerator in the middle of a desert. The crowd let out a collective sigh of pure, unadulterated relief. I stepped back and held the door open like a doorman at a five-star hotel. "Folks," I announced to the sweaty masses, "the City of Whispering Willows officially declares this facility open for business." A ragged cheer went up. People shuffled past me, their faces breaking into grateful smiles. Mrs. Gable patted my arm as she went by. "Oh, thank you, dear boy. You're a lifesaver." Jennifer gave me a look of such profound gratitude I almost felt like a genuine hero. They flooded into the blessedly cool interior, leaving me and Brenda on the scorching sidewalk. I turned to face her, a wide, innocent smile plastered on my face. She was just standing there, sputtering, her mouth opening and closing like a beached fish. For the first time since I'd met her, Brenda McGillicuddy was speechless. And it was magnificent. The magnificent silence lasted for approximately 30 seconds. Brenda's brain, momentarily short-circuited by my act of brazen defiance, rebooted with a vengeance. Her face snapped from stunned purple to furious crimson, and her hand shot to the smartphone clipped to her waistband. "You've committed a crime!" she seethed, her fingers jabbing at the screen. "Breaking and entering, trespassing, destruction of order. I'm calling the police." "Go for it," I said, leaning casually against the doorframe, soaking in the cool air spilling out. "Tell them to bring water. It's a scorcher." She stalked off to the edge of the lawn, presumably for better reception to the Justice League, and began squawking into her phone. Inside, the atmosphere was jubilant. Mr. Henderson was holding court by the water fountain, retelling the story of my key-wielding heroism with increasing embellishments. In his version, I think I kicked the door down. I accepted a bottle of water from a grateful teenager and settled in to wait for the inevitable. 15 minutes later, a patrol car rolled lazily to the curb. 2 officers got out. One was older, with a thick mustache and a weary expression that suggested he'd seen every possible permutation of suburban nonsense. This was Officer Miller. His partner was younger, crisper, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite and an earnest, by-the-book demeanor. Officer Davis. Brenda practically sprinted to meet them, launching into a high-pitched, frantic explanation before they'd even closed their car doors. She pointed at me, then at the open community center, then back at me. I could only catch snippets, but they included phrases like rogue city employee, inciting a riot, and flagrant disregard for bylaws. Miller listened with the patience of a man waiting for his coffee to brew, while Davis took out a notepad, his brow furrowed with concentration. Finally, Miller held up a hand to stem the tide of Brenda's outrage. "Okay, ma'am, let me just get this straight. You closed the public cooling center during a record-breaking heat wave?" "It was a necessary measure to mitigate liability," she insisted. Miller's mustache twitched. "Right, liability." He ambled over to me, Davis following a step behind. "You Alex?" "The one and only," I said, taking a sip of my water. "Public Works. Just doing an unscheduled HVAC wellness check. Everything seems to be in working order, by the way. Top notch." Davis cleared his throat. "Sir, the complainant alleges that you forced entry into a locked facility." "Forced entry? No. I held up the brass key, which I hadn't put away. "Used the correct key. Standard procedure when a municipal asset requires inspection. You can check my city ID if you like." I handed it over. Miller barely glanced at it before handing it back. He'd seen this movie before. He was the grizzled detective on his last day before retirement, and Brenda was the hysterical witness who thinks her stolen lawn flamingo is the crime of the century. He turned back to Brenda. "Ma'am, this is a city building. He's a city employee. He has a key. I'm not seeing the crime here." But the HOA manages this facility," she sputtered. "We have a charter." "You can manage it all you want," Miller said, his voice flat. "But you can't lock the public out of a city asset, especially not during a state-declared heat emergency. In fact," he added, a glint in his eye, "if anyone was close to breaking a law here, it might have been you." "Reckless endangerment, maybe?" Officer Davis, the rookie, looked momentarily intrigued, his pen hovering over his notepad. Brenda's jaw dropped. The idea that she could be in the wrong was a concept as foreign to her as quantum physics. "But the non-residents, the insurance—" "That's a civil matter," Miller sighed, clearly reaching the end of his patience. "Take it up with the city council on Monday. For now, this building stays open. And I'd advise you not to call 911 again unless there's an actual emergency. We've got real problems to deal with." He gave her a final, tired look, tipped his hat to me, and they walked back to their car. As they drove away, I saw Miller say something to Davis, and they both broke into laughter. The victory was sweet. I was the conquering hero, the key master, the champion of the common man. I had faced the dragon in her natural habitat and won. But as I watched Brenda standing alone on the sidewalk, her hands clenched into tight fists and her eyes burning holes into the side of my head, I knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning. I hadn't just opened a door, I had declared war. And the HOA battlefield is fought not with swords and shields, but with violation notices and passive-aggressive flyers. And I had a feeling the first volley was coming my way very, very soon. The next morning, the war began. It started not with a bang, but with the shrill ring of my office phone. It was my boss, Frank. Frank is a man whose entire career has been a masterclass in avoiding conflict. He views paperwork as a shield and bureaucracy as a fortress. His personal motto, which he once shared with me during a particularly bland team-building exercise, is, "Don't poke the bear, Alex. Don't even make eye contact with the bear." In Frank's world, everything is a bear, especially angry HOA presidents. "Alex," he said, his voice a low, nervous hum, "we need to talk about your extracurricular activities yesterday." "Morning, Frank. To what do I owe the pleasure? Did you hear about my heroic rescue of the overheated masses? I heard about you commandeering a municipal building and nearly getting the city sued into oblivion," he groaned. "I have 17 emails from a Brenda McGillicuddy. She CC'd the mayor, the entire city council, 3 local news stations, and I think the governor. The governor, Alex. She claims you're a rogue agent." "I prefer proactive civil servant," I said, leaning back in my chair. Look, Frank, she locked elderly people out in 108-degree heat. What was I supposed to do? There was a long pause, filled with the sound of Frank probably chewing on an antacid tablet. You were supposed to file a report, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. You were supposed to escalate it through the proper channels. You were supposed to form a committee to assess the situation. There wasn't time for a committee, Frank. People were melting. The point is, he sighed, you've made waves. Big ones. The city manager's office has already called. They're monitoring the situation, which is code for don't screw up again or you're fired. So, what do you want me to do? Nothing, he practically shouted. Lie low, become invisible. Do your job, file your reports, and for the love of God, stay away from Brenda McGillicuddy. Do not engage. Do not provoke. Let the bear go back to sleep. Got it, Frank, I'm a ghost. I hung up the phone feeling less like a ghost and more like a target. Frank's warning was still echoing in my ears when I got home that evening and found the first volley of Brenda's counterattack taped to my door. It was naturally laminated. Official HOA violation notice. Violation. Bylaw. 8, subsection 2, lawn height discrepancy. Grass in the northeast quadrant of your property exceeds the maximum regulation height of 3.5 inches by approximately 0.25 inches. Violation? Bylaw. 21, subsection 7. Unapproved entry. Decor? Welcome mat, nice underwear. Is deemed non-compliant with community aesthetic standards. Violation. Bylaw. 12. Subsection 1. Improper waste receptacle storage. Recycling bin was visible from the street for a period exceeding the 12-hour post-pickup grace period. Fines will be assessed daily until these violations are rectified. Thank you for your cooperation. I crumpled the notice in my fist. This was her game. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. The next day, flyers appeared on every lamppost in Whispering Willows. They featured a grainy, unflattering photo of me from the community center and a headline that read, "Is this rogue city employee putting your property values at risk?" The text below was a masterwork of fear-mongering, implying that my actions had opened the floodgates for loitering, vagrancy, and a general decline in our beige-tastic suburban utopia. I was fuming. I was supposed to lie low, but Brenda was carpet-bombing my reputation. I spent the evening pacing my living room, staring out the window at the sad, pathetic patch of land that separated the community center from the sidewalk. It was a dusty, weed-choked rectangle of forgotten potential, officially designated as Parkland on the city maps, but serving only as a graveyard for sun-bleached dandelions. It was ugly, it was neglected, and it was 100% city property. An idea started to form in my mind. It was a terrible, beautiful, magnificently petty idea. Brenda hated unauthorized gatherings. She hated things she couldn't control. She hated anything that disrupted her perfectly curated, sterile environment. What if I could use my position not just to react to her tyranny, but to build a permanent, joy-inducing monument to spite right on her doorstep? My pace quickened. A park. Not a sad patch of dirt, but a real park. A place for kids to run around. A place for Mrs. Gable to sit in the shade. A place for community barbecues. A vibrant, thriving, HOA-proof paradise that would drive Brenda absolutely, certifiably insane. The fire was lit. That night, I didn't sleep. I drove to the office, let myself in with my magic keys, and descended into the dusty catacombs of the city archives. I was a man on a mission. For hours, I dug through old zoning maps, property deeds, and council meeting minutes from decades past. My fingers were gray with dust, but my heart was light. And then I found it. The Holy Grail. A line item in the 1994 municipal budget. The Whispering Willows Community Green Space Improvement Grant. It was a chunk of money set aside to develop that very plot of land, a grant that was approved, funded, and then promptly forgotten when the city council got distracted by a contentious debate about pigeon control. The money had been sitting in a dormant city account for almost 30 years. According to the city charter, as a representative of the Department of Public Works, I had the authority to reactivate dormant beautification grants for properties within my assigned district. The process wouldn't even require a new council vote. It just required the right forms, the right signatures, and the right person who knew which dusty levers to pull. I leaned back in the creaky archive chair, a slow, wicked grin spreading across my face. Brenda wanted a war? Fine. But she was bringing laminated notices to a bulldozer fight. And I was about to break ground. An idea, no matter how gloriously spiteful, is just an idea. To turn my park-based revenge fantasy into a reality, I needed muscle. I needed expertise. I needed someone who knew how to turn a dirt patch into a paradise, and preferably someone who also hated HOAs. I knew exactly who to call. Sal. Sal was a contractor the city kept on a short list for jobs that were too small for the big firms but too complicated for our in-house maintenance guys. He was a grizzled 60-something whirlwind of sawdust and unfiltered opinions. He'd been in the construction game so long, he probably remembered laying the foundation for ancient Rome. Most importantly, I'd once overheard him spend 20 minutes describing, in loving detail, all the ways an HOA board could be launched into the sun. He was my guy. I arranged to meet him at the Greasy Spoon, a diner where the coffee was strong enough to dissolve steel and the pancakes were the size of hubcaps. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth, staring down a plate of eggs and bacon like he was about to interrogate it. "Alex," he grunted as I slid into the booth. "You sounded urgent. If this is about that pothole on Maple, it's on the list. Right between fix sinkhole on 3rd Pointour and figure out what that smell is down by the creek." "It's not about a pothole, Sal. It's bigger. It's about justice. It's about fighting oppression. And it's about installing a splash pad." Sal paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. He squinted at me. "You been drinking?" I spent the next 10 minutes laying it all out. The heat wave, the locked doors, Brenda the beige tyrant, the harassment campaign, and my grand vision for the barren plot of land next to the community center. I pulled out the old city plans I'd printed and the copy of the dormant grant. When I was finished, Sal was quiet for a long time, slowly chewing a piece of bacon. He stared at the plans on the table, then looked up at me. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You want to use a 30-year-old grant that nobody remembers, fast-track the permits using your inside man status, and build a whole new park with sprinklers and benches and the works in like 2 weeks. That's the gist of it. And the primary motivation here," he continued, leaning forward, "is to royally tick off some lady in a sun visor?" "Essentially, yes," I admitted. "But also, for the community. And the kids. Mrs. Gable needs a nice place to sit. But mostly, yeah, the visor lady." A slow grin spread across Sal's leathery face. It was a beautiful, terrifying sight. He stabbed his fork into a sausage link with sudden enthusiasm. "I'm in." "You are?" "Kid, I've had run-ins with HOAs that would make your hair curl," he said, taking a gulp of coffee. "I once had a board try to fine me because my porta-potty was, and I quote, an incongruous shade of blue. Another one tried to write up my crew for having unharmonious lunch coolers. I live for this stuff. This isn't just a job. This is a public service. We were a team. A 2-man conspiracy of righteousness and petty revenge. We spent the next hour sketching out a more detailed plan on the back of a paper placemat. My vision combined with his practical expertise. "A splash pad is good," he'd say, scribbling with a crayon he borrowed from the waitress. but we put it right at the edge of the property line, so the mist drifts over her prize-winning rose bushes. Drives 'em nuts. I was thinking a couple of nice, quiet benches for the seniors, I'd suggest. Perfect. And we install a big charcoal BBQ pit right next to them. The nice, quiet seniors can enjoy the constant, delicious smell of grilling meat, which, according to every HOA rulebook ever written, is a nuisance odor. It's bulletproof. By the time we left the diner, the placemat was a work of art. It detailed a small but perfectly formed park, every element engineered for maximum community benefit and maximum Brenda annoyance. We'd have shaded benches, a community garden area with raised beds, the state-of-the-art BBQ pit, and the pièce de résistance, a motion-activated splash pad for the kids. The last piece of the puzzle was the bureaucracy. Sal could handle the construction, but I had to clear the path. I spent the next 2 days in a blur of paperwork. I called in every small favor I was owed. I walked forms from one department to another by hand, using my city ID to bypass receptionists and cut lines. I exploited loopholes in the permitting process that only a career paper pusher would know existed. I told Frank it was a minor landscaping initiative to mitigate soil erosion. He was too scared to ask questions. By Friday afternoon, it was done. I had a stack of signed, stamped, and approved permits in my hand. I called Sal. "We're a go," I said. "All green lights." "Excellent," he replied. I could hear the sound of power tools in the background. "My crew will be there Monday, 7 a.m. sharp. Tell your neighbors to get some earplugs." Monday morning arrived, not with the gentle chirping of birds, but with the glorious, earth-shaking roar of a diesel engine. At 7:01 a.m., a flatbed truck carrying a small but determined-looking bulldozer rumbled down my street. It was followed by Sal's pickup truck and a van full of his crew. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I sipped my coffee by the window, watching the show unfold like a kid on Christmas morning. The effect on the neighborhood was immediate. Curtains twitched, doors opened a crack. And then, as if on cue, Brenda's front door flew open. She emerged, clad in a pink silk bathrobe and with her hair in curlers, looking like a suburban banshee summoned from a nightmare. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, marching across her lawn onto the contested patch of dirt where Sal was directing the bulldozer operator. Sal, who had been anticipating this moment with undisguised glee, tipped his hard hat to her. "Morning, ma'am. Public Works. We're here for the Community Green Space Improvement Project." "The what?" she sputtered. I chose that moment to make my entrance, strolling over with my coffee mug in hand. "It's a city beautification initiative, Brenda," I said cheerfully. "We're putting in a park. For the community." Brenda's eyes narrowed into slits. "You can't do this. This is a quiet zone until 9 a.m. It's in the bylaws. Noise violations." Sal pulled a folded piece of paper from his back pocket and handed it to her. "City permit, ma'am. Allows for construction noise from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Fully authorized." She scanned the permit, her face tightening. She wasn't done. "This is an unapproved alteration of a common area. All landscaping changes must be submitted to the Architectural Review Committee." I stepped forward. "Actually, Brenda, as per the city plat map from 1978, this parcel is designated municipal property, not HOA common area. We're well within our rights." I tapped the side of my nose. "Did my homework." She glared from me to Sal, her mind racing, searching for another angle of attack. Those trucks," she stammered, pointing a trembling finger. "You can't park commercial vehicles on a residential street." Sal's apprentice, a young, eager kid named Kevin, produced another set of permits from the truck's glove compartment. "Commercial vehicle parking waivers, ma'am. Signed and sealed. Check, check, and checkmate." With every objection she raised, we had an answer, a permit, a neatly stamped piece of paper that rendered her authority utterly void. She was a queen without a kingdom, a tyrant outside her jurisdiction. Defeated on all fronts, she let out a sound like a deflating balloon and stormed back into her house. The bulldozer's engine roared to life, and the first scoop of dusty earth was lifted. The war had turned into a ground invasion, and we had established a beachhead. Over the next few days, the transformation was incredible. Sal's crew worked with the efficiency of a military unit. The barren ground was graded. Trenches for irrigation and the splash pad pipes were dug. The community's reaction was a beautiful thing to watch. After a day or two of cautious curiosity, people started to embrace it. Mrs. Gable came out and gave Kevin a bag of homemade cookies. Jennifer, the young mom, brought the crew a cooler full of iced tea. Mr. Henderson would wander over every afternoon and give Sal unsolicited advice on sprinkler head placement. A small crowd of kids started gathering after school every day, watching the construction with wide-eyed wonder, asking when the splash pad would be ready. We were building more than a park. We were building a community. The very thing Brenda claimed to be protecting with her iron-fisted rule was flourishing in an act of open rebellion against her. She watched from her window, a silent, furious sentinel. But her flyers disappeared from the lampposts, and the violation notices stopped. It was a temporary truce, but I knew she was just regrouping. She was looking for a silver bullet, one last desperate play to shut us down, and I had no doubt she would find one. The silver bullet came on a Thursday morning. We were ahead of schedule. The splash pad was in, the frames for the benches were set, and a truckload of fresh, green sod was due to arrive in an hour. The park was taking shape, looking less like a construction site, and more like a place you'd actually want to be. The mood was optimistic. That's when a pristine, state government-issue sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in a crisp polo shirt with an EPA logo embroidered on it got out, holding a clipboard. He was met at the edge of the property by Brenda, who was pointing frantically at a small, roped-off section in the middle of our work site. My heart sank. The Environmental Protection Agency. This was a new level of warfare. Sal ambled over to me, wiping his hands on a rag. "Oh," he muttered. "That's the big guns. What's she cooked up now?" We walked over to meet the agent, who introduced himself as Mr. Fields. Brenda stood beside him, looking impossibly smug. She had the expression of someone who has just played a royal flush. "Gentlemen," Fields said in a dry, official tone, "I've received a report of a potential violation of the State Protected Flora Act. Mrs. McGillicuddy here has identified what she believes to be a patch of Cypripedium acaule, the pink lady's slipper orchid, a protected species." He pointed with his pen to the roped-off area. In the middle of the dirt sat a cluster of utterly unremarkable green weeds. "If it is the lady's slipper," Fields continued, "all work must cease immediately pending a full environmental impact study. That could take months, maybe years." This was it. Brenda's masterstroke. It was brilliant in its simplicity. She'd found a weed, given it a fancy name, and called in the authorities. The bureaucratic red tape she'd weaponized could tie us up in knots until the grant expired and the project withered on the vine. I looked at the pathetic weed. I looked at Brenda's triumphant smirk. For the first time, I felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe she'd actually won. But then I looked at Sal. He wasn't panicking. In fact, he looked bored. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call. "Yeah, it's Sal. He's here. Bring the secret weapon." He hung up and turned to the EPA agent. "Mind if we get a second opinion, Mr. Fields? My guy is just around the corner." Fields shrugged. "Be my guest." 5 minutes later, a beat-up Subaru Forester covered in nature-themed bumper stickers pulled up. Out hopped a man with a wild mane of gray hair, wearing Birkenstock sandals and a t-shirt that said, "Talk dirty to me," about soil composition. This was Dr. Finch, a botany professor from the local university whom Sal apparently kept on retainer for just such occasions. Dr. Finch bounced over to the roped-off weed, a magnifying glass already in hand. He knelt, peered at the plant for no more than 10 seconds, and then stood up, beaming at all of us. "Oh, marvelous!" he exclaimed, his voice full of academic glee. Brenda's smirk widened. "See? Marvelous! Protected!" Dr. Finch chuckled. "Oh no, my dear lady, not at all. This isn't Cypripedium acaule. That's a woodland orchid. This little fellow is Convolvulus arvensis, common field bindweed, an incredibly noxious invasive species, actually." Brenda's face froze. "Noxious." "Oh, absolutely," Dr. Finch continued cheerfully. "Class B noxious weed in this state. It's a menace, chokes out native plants, an absolute terror in the garden. In fact," he said, turning to Mr. Fields, "the state has a mandate for its removal. By tearing up this patch of land, these gentlemen are actually performing a valuable public service. They're helping to eradicate an invasive species. Good on you, lads. You're environmental stewards." Mr. Fields, the EPA agent, stared at the weed, then at Brenda, then at the grinning botanist. He sighed the deep, weary sigh of a man who just drove an hour for nothing. He made a note on his clipboard. "Well," he said, "that settles that. No violation here. In fact, thank you for your environmental stewardship." He tipped his head to us, completely ignored Brenda, and walked back to his car. The public humiliation was total. It happened in front of Sal's entire crew, Mr. Henderson, and a handful of other neighbors who had gathered to watch the drama. Dr. Finch gave the offending weed one last cheerful look before heading back to his Subaru. Brenda just stood there, her face ashen, her ultimate weapon having not just misfired but blown up in her hands. She turned, without a word, and retreated into her house. This time I knew she wouldn't be coming back out. The war was over. 2 days later, the park was finished. The sod was down, a lush carpet of impossible green. The benches were bolted into their concrete pads, smelling faintly of fresh paint. The sapling trees were staked, and the raised garden beds were filled with rich, dark soil. And in the center of it all, the splash pad glistened, silent for now, waiting for its moment of glory. We decided to christen it with a grand opening barbecue that Saturday. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. We didn't even have to print flyers. The day was perfect. The heat wave had finally broken, leaving behind a sky of brilliant, cloudless blue. Sal and I manned the new BBQ pit, grilling up a mountain of burgers and hot dogs. The smell, as Sal had predicted, drifted pleasantly through the air, a beautiful nuisance. The whole neighborhood came out. Everyone except Brenda, whose curtains remained drawn in what I hoped was a permanent state of shame. Mrs. Gable sat on one of the new benches, holding court and accepting a hot dog from Kevin. Jennifer's baby, along with a dozen other shrieking, laughing kids, ran through the erupting fountains of the splash pad, their joy an explosive, infectious force. Mr. Henderson was showing a small group how to properly season a burger. Even Officer Miller's patrol car slowed as it passed. He rolled down the window, gave me a slow nod and a genuine thumbs up, and then drove on. The biggest surprise was Frank. My boss, the man whose spine was rumored to be made of jello, actually showed up. He stood awkwardly at the edge of the crowd for a while, before I brought him a burger. "Have to admit, Alex," he said, keeping his voice low, "it's a nice park." "Thanks, Frank." "The city manager's office called," he continued. "They're pleased. The local news ran a small human interest story. Public Works employee revitalizes neighborhood. They're calling it a model of proactive community engagement." He took a bite of his burger. They're thinking of giving you a promotion." I almost choked on my soda. "You're kidding?" "I'm not," he said, a rare, small smile on his face. "Just try not to start any more wars with HOA presidents for a while, okay? My ulcer can't take it." He wandered off to get a napkin, leaving me to survey my handiwork. Sal came over and handed me a cold beer. "Not bad, kid," he said, looking at the laughing families. "Not bad at all." I looked around at this little oasis we had built. It started as an act of defiance, a rebellion born of heat and frustration. It was fueled by spite, sure, but it had become something more. It was a place where Mrs. Gable could sit in the shade, where kids could cool off, where neighbors who barely knew each other were now laughing and sharing a meal. We hadn't just built a park. We'd reclaimed a little piece of our community from the clutches of petty tyranny. I took a long sip of my beer and a big bite of my burger. The sun was warm on my face, the sound of happy kids filled the air, and for the first time in a long time, Whispering Willows actually felt like a home. Yeah, I thought to myself, totally worth the lawn violation.